Let's dive into this history. The Archivist of Echoes. Morning in Rome did not shout, it whispered. A rhythm of hooves, the rustle of linen market tents, the scent of fresh bread floating up from Trastevere's alleys. Birds flitted across the marble cornices of the Temple of Apollo, unbothered by empire or memory. But beneath all that, deep below, the domeless Livia archive breathed a different rhythm. Here, history wasn't made. It was hidden. The light never changed. The air smelled of wax, old ink, and secrets best left in silence. And Lucius Terentius, aged 22, had begun to wonder if he'd traded his life for ghosts. He wasn't unhappy. Not exactly. The quiet suited him. But lately, even the careful silence of scrolls had started to feel like it was watching him. Like each line of ink carried not just stories, but judgment. That morning, he sat hunched over his desk, cataloging records destined for destruction, decrees erased by Augustus, testimonies of those who opposed the empire, words too bold to survive. He had learned to read between the lines. And then, number 4421, Dicta non prolata, Marcus Tullius. A speech unspoken. Cicero. The name struck him like a dropped torch in dry straw. Cicero. The Republic's voice. The man whose words could move mobs or shake senators. And here, a speech that never reached Rome's ears? Lucius's heart raced. He scanned the record again. Location, room B7. He frowned. That room lay beneath the restricted stacks, far beneath. He had never seen it. Some said it wasn't even part of the archive proper, but a place kept alive by habit and whispers. The custodian listed? Unknown. At noon, with his robe gathered and lamp in hand, Lucius descended. The staircase wound like a curling snake, stone growing darker, older. Even the air shifted, turning heavy, damp with the scent of sealed ages. At the bottom, a single iron door, cracked open just enough for a flicker of lamplight to escape. He entered. A figure sat with his boots up on a crate reading. Worn tunic, patched cloak, and a ring of dull iron on one thick finger. His face was lined not by age but by surviving. "You're the pretty-handed one," the man said without looking up. "The boy who draws letters like dancers." Lucius straightened. "Lucius Terentius. Archivarius under Gaius Silanus. That name means little down here," the man replied. He finally looked up, his eyes tired but sharp. "Servius. Guardian. At least, that's what they call me. In truth, I keep people from reading what should stay unread." Lucius hesitated, then unrolled the entry. "It says the scroll exists. B7. Dicta non prolata." Servius studied the slip. His face didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the parchment. "It's not here. But if it exists, it shouldn't." Lucius met his gaze. "It's Cicero." Servius's mouth twisted. "Exactly." A long pause. Then the old guard grunted and stood. "Come, then. Let's see what your curiosity's worth." They walked through a hallway that smelled like forgotten things. Stone pressed in on all sides, carved with worn Latin proverbs, most unreadable. The air grew thick with a weight that didn't come from dust. At the end stood a narrow door of blackened iron. No lock. No seal. Only a carving of a wolf's head, its eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if dreaming of blood. Servius pushed it open. The room was round, quiet. No shelves. No chaos. Only a single pedestal. Upon it, a scroll sealed with wax so red it looked like blood. Lucius stepped forward. The seal bore no imperial mark. Only a name, hurriedly scratched. M.T. Cicero. Beneath it, in letters finer than a whisper. Ad posterum.to what comes after. His hand reached out, trembling. Then halted. Behind him, Servius spoke softly. "Some words die because they must. Others live because someone dared to listen." Lucius did not look back. He placed his hand on the scroll. The room exhaled. Lucius followed Servius through a corridor that felt less like part of the archive and more like the inside of a sealed tomb. The walls were damp, the scent no longer parchment and dust, but stone, moisture, and something else. Something almost organic, as though memory itself had decayed here, slowly, patiently, without ever truly dying. These chambers, Servius said without turning, aren't on any map. Not the ones drawn by quills, anyway. They stopped before a narrow door held shut by a thick iron bar. This is where they keep the records that should have been burned, he said. Lucius frowned. Then why weren't they? Servius glanced over his shoulder, and in the dim light his eyes seemed almost amused. Because even emperors fear silence. These scrolls, they sleep. But they remember. And some of them, given the wrong breath, might wake. He lifted the bar. The hinges moaned. Inside was a long chamber lined with ancient wooden shelves, most of them half empty. Dust blanketed everything in a kind of sacred stillness. In the corner, 3 crates marked only SBQ, Senatus Populusque, the rest rubbed away, like a sentence swallowed midword. Servius walked toward the crates slowly. This is where my story began, he muttered. I was a scribe under Marcus Antonius. Then, later, I worked for a senator named Licinius. Lucius blinked. He knew that name. Licinius had been whispered in margins of suppressed histories. A man with too much memory, too little caution. Licinius, Lucius said quietly. He was the one who was meant to deliver Cicero's last words to the Senate. Servius said nothing. He knelt beside one crate and opened it carefully, as if disturbing a relic. Inside was a scroll, wrapped in a linen cloth yellowed with time. He passed it to Lucius. This is a copy. Incomplete. But it's real. We transcribed it in secret. Me and the man I still remember. Lucius met his eyes. The one who didn't return? Servius nodded. His name was Fabian. He believed truth could be spoken aloud. He died trying to show this to a senator who didn't believe in memory. He looked away. I kept the copy. Hid it here. Buried it in dust. Lucius held the scroll gently, like something that might fracture under breath. He unrolled it slowly. The ink was faded, but the words clear. There were no accusations. No threats. Just a message that felt unnervingly close to prayer. And if we lose our voice, let us not lose our memory. Empire does not begin with the sword. It begins with what we forget to say. Servius quietly extinguished the lamp. Darkness settled in, thick and warm. You're young, Servius said. You still believe truth changes things. Sometimes it does. Other times, it just disturbs the quiet. You have to decide which you want more. If you choose to go deeper, tomorrow, we walk a different path. Lucius' voice barely rose above a whisper. Where does it lead? Servius turned back to the door. To the footprints of those who never wrote history, but lived inside it. That night, Lucius lay awake in his stone chamber. The silence of the archive pressed against the walls, but his mind would not still. Those words unsaid, unread, unchanged for decades, echoed behind his eyes. And the shape of Servius, half lost in shadow, no longer seemed a man guarding ruins, but something else. A custodian of ghosts. Lucius exhaled slowly. Maybe my role isn't to find the truth, he thought. Maybe it's to protect it, until someone else is ready to hear it. Outside his window, the moon traced a silent arc above Rome. And beneath it, the past waited. He got up, walked to his desk, and lit a single candle. There, in the margin of his own journal, he wrote one line. If the empire is built on what is forgotten, then remembering is an act of rebellion. He let the ink dry slowly, the words sinking into the parchment like roots into soil. At dawn, Rome breathed stone and wine. The streets were still empty, hushed in the pale light of a city built on memory and conquest. Pigeons strutted like emperors among breadcrumbs scattered across the forum, indifferent to the weight of history beneath their feet. Lucius walked beside Servius, the forbidden scroll tucked into a leather satchel beneath his toga. Sleep had not come easily. The words he'd read the night before echoed through his skull like hammers against marble. He had imagined once, that history was something studied. Not something that walked beside you, whispering warnings. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. "To the temple of Janus," Servius replied. "But not to pray." The old shrine lay near the foot of the Velian hill, devoted to the god of beginnings, endings, doors, and transitions. Legend said that when the temple's doors were closed, Rome was at peace. When they stood open, war walked the streets. That morning, they were slightly ajar. Like the truth. Behind the main altar lay a side chamber once used to store private letters, tribunes' correspondence, magistrates' petitions, even personal notes from senators. Officially, it was an archive. Unofficially, it was a graveyard. Inside, the air smelled of dried herbs, limestone damp, and the dusty patience of forgotten parchment. Time itself seemed to settle like a curtain across the room, muffling breath and footstep alike. A man in a dark green tunic sat near the entrance, eyes clouded by age. He nodded silently at Servius. "That's Castor," Servius whispered. "Used to be a translator for Cato the Elder. Some say he watched Pompey's letters burn with his own eyes." Lucius shivered. The weight of unspoken memory lingered like fog in this place. They were looking for a single item, Cicero's personal letter to Tribune Publius Salvius. The scroll was said to explain the meaning behind his final, unspoken speech. Names. Accusations. A warning that Augustus would become an empire without a soul. Lucius followed the markings on the archive shelves. But when he reached the spot, it was empty. "Impossible," he murmured. "Archives don't misplace things." Servius' expression darkened. "Then it was taken. Or maybe, it was never shelved at all. Someone knows what we're looking for." At that moment, the door creaked open. A woman stepped inside. Slender, composed, dressed in a plain but well-kept tunic the color of dark wine. In her hands, a scroll. "You're missing something," she said. Servius tensed. Lucius remained silent. "I'm Titia, Castor's niece." I read between the lines. "That scroll? It's not lost. It's bait." She explained that someone had come the night before, a man in a dark toga, wearing a gold ring. He hadn't given his name, only instructions. "If anyone comes asking for the letter, delay them. Then inform someone at the Curia." Servius cursed under his breath. "Gaius Liberius," he growled. "Used to be Messina's student. Now he's Augustus' shadow in the archives. If he knows we found the copy." Titia nodded grimly. "Then we're the next thing to be erased." Castor, who hadn't moved until now, finally spoke, his voice like the creak of old wood. "There's an exit beneath the old purification chamber. Leads outside the forum. But move quickly. There are already 3 on their way." Without hesitation, the 3 descended through a trapdoor into the temple's undercroft. The tunnels were narrow, damp, filled with remnants of the Republic, rusted shields, crumbling plumes, sandals from battles no one remembered. Every step echoed like footsteps on the spine of a dying century. Near the exit, Lucius stumbled. The scroll slipped from his hand, unrolling across the ground. A line had been added. One that wasn't there before. "By reading this, you have already chosen." They emerged near the ruins of Velia, where a closed building bore the seal of the old Senate, abandoned, forgotten. On its door, scratched in chalk, 3 vertical lines. Lucius stared. So did Servius. "That mark," he whispered. "It was on Cicero's speech." Titia ran her fingers across the door. "Then this is it," she said. "Not an end. A beginning." Servius looked at the building, his voice barely a breath. "We have arrived at the source." The street of Velia was silent, coated in fine dust and broken cobbles. Long ago, it had been home to senators, orators, and old republicans who once shaped the words that shaped Rome. Now it was little more than a scar of history, forgotten, cracked, and covered in creeping vines. The house with the 3 marks on the door leaned slightly to one side, its faded frescoes flaking like dried skin under the morning sun. Yet when Servius pressed his hand to the wood, The door swung open without resistance, as if it had been waiting. He stood still for a moment, eyes reflecting something deeper than fear. Pain, perhaps. Or memory. "This is where we used to meet," he murmured. "Me, Fabian, 2 others. And one, whose name I never knew." Titia stepped closer, scanning the walls. "This place doesn't appear in any record." Servius nodded. "Then it was never meant to." Inside, the air was dry, preserved. Not looted. Not desecrated. The dust lay evenly, undisturbed, like it had made peace with time. The room seemed to sigh with the weight of stories too heavy to be spoken aloud. On a wide table near the back wall lay a single strip of parchment, bearing the wax impression of an unknown seal. In the corner stood a strange object, a wax cylinder box, ancient, crude, but intact. Lucius narrowed his eyes. "A recording device?" "Fabian had a habit," Servius said. "He didn't trust handwriting. Said spoken truth hit harder than ink. He recorded things. One day he told me, if my voice survives, let it speak where I cannot." Servius gently set the device onto the table and turned the dial. A crackle. Then, after a long breath, a voice. Dry, deliberate, but alive. "If you hear this, then we failed. But not everything is lost. This speech was not meant for the Senate. It was meant for those who still believe words are stronger than blades. There was one among us who never spoke. His silence was the loudest cry. Trust not the voice, trust the eyes. If you must run, don't run from fear. Run toward truth." Silence again. Lucius stood frozen. The voice echoed in his bones. "That's him," he whispered. "That's Fabian." Servius closed his eyes. "He died for this. He trusted me with it. And I never came back. I thought I had failed him." In the adjoining room, Titia uncovered scattered papers and faded maps, blueprints of the forum, annotations in red ink, and notes in multiple hands. Some scrolls had blood stains on their corners. At the center of one map, circled and underlined, G. Liberius. Lucius exhaled slowly. "He was a name even then. And now he's a whisper in every archive," said Servius. "The Emperor's quietest hand. He doesn't burn history. He buries it." Titia traced her fingers over a spot in the wall. There, just beneath the paint, was a word scratched into the plaster. "Archivum cordis. The Archive of the Heart." She read aloud. "It's not a title," said Servius. "It's a direction." Behind a loose tile, Titia uncovered a hollow in the stone. Inside, a small bronze plaque etched with a symbol, a key and the emblem of the Temple of Vesta. Lucius leaned closer. "That mark, Vesta's flame, that archive, is real? Only mentioned in stories?" Servius murmured. "They say it housed speeches too dangerous to deliver, but too sacred to destroy." Titia folded the plaque carefully into a cloth. "And now it wants to be found." As they prepared to leave, a soft thud echoed behind them. A scrap of parchment had fallen from behind a cracked painting. Lucius picked it up, confused. It was in his handwriting. But he had never written it. "You'll reach where I could not. Don't betray a single word." He read it twice, then looked at the others. Titia's expression turned grave. "Someone knows our path." Servius, pale, clenched his jaw. "Or someone walks ahead of us," he said, "and waits." Returning to the archive was supposed to feel like coming home. But as Lucius stepped over the blackened threshold, he knew this place was no longer the sanctuary it had been. Smoke still hung in the air, thick with the scent of burned parchment and wet stone. The stairs were littered with scorched timber, collapsed shelves, and pages curled in on themselves, blackened at the edges but refusing to vanish entirely. Servius was already inside, pacing the perimeter of the devastation like a ghost retracing the ruins of his own memory. Titia followed in silence, her hands clenched, her eyes sharp and unreadable. Lucius hesitated on the final step. He clutched the bronze tablet tighter, the one from the Vestal crypt, and inhaled the bitter scent of history undone. It wasn't random, Servius said at last, stopping at the far wall. His voice sounded hoarse, like the fire had crept into his lungs. This wasn't an accident. Someone knew exactly what they wanted to destroy. Lucius moved closer, scanning the damage. The archive hadn't been razed in full, only a single section had been thoroughly gutted. The shelves labeled dicta non prolata, unspoken speeches, had been reduced to ash and wire. Titia knelt near the debris. Her fingers brushed over the edge of a melted plaque. They targeted Cicero's section, she said. This was a warning. Beneath the ashes, Lucius's hand brushed against something firm. He pulled it free, a corner of parchment, singed at the edges but mostly intact. On the back was a drawn diagram, circular chambers, descending corridors, and a sigil that resembled a flame. He stared at it, heartbeat quickening. It's a schematic, he whispered. Underground, under the Temple of Vesta. Titia's eyes narrowed. The old crypt. Sealed after the Great Fire. No one has entered in decades. A faint noise came from the shadows, rustling, like cloth against stone. All three turned. A boy emerged from behind a collapsed shelf, coughing. His robe was scorched, his hair singed. He looked barely 14. Who are you? Servius asked, stepping between Lucius and the boy. The boy swallowed hard. P. Plautus, he stammered. I help in the archive. Carry water, sweep floors. I was here when they came. They? Plautus nodded. 3 of them. One in a dark blue toga with a gold medallion. A woman with a knife in her hair. And the last wore a priest's mask. They didn't search. They went straight to the speech scrolls. Took one. Burned the rest. He looked down, ashamed. Before they left, the woman placed a slip of parchment in your study, Master Lucius. I stole it. From beneath his robe, Plautus produced a folded scrap of paper. Servius took it and unfolded it carefully. Written in sharp, deliberate ink were the words, "To preserve peace, one must sometimes burn memory." Beneath that, 3 vertical slashes, identical to the ones marked on the door of the forgotten Senate building. And one final word, carved into the parchment as if with a blade. Vesta. Lucius looked to Servius. The tablet. It matches the slot in the diagram. It's a key. And the diagram is the map. Titia added. They burn the speeches, but not the path to what lies beneath. We go there, Servius said firmly. Tonight. Plautus hesitated, then stepped forward. I know the way in. There's an old access tunnel. I used to hide in it when the guards were drunk. It hasn't been cleaned in years. Lucius reached down, brushing aside more ash. Something metallic gleamed underneath. It was a seal ring, worn, blackened by heat. But the inscription remained. T. Terentius. He froze. That's my father? Titia met his eyes. Then you've been part of this longer than you knew. Lucius stared down at the ring. The smoke swirled around him, and the words on the parchment seemed to echo in his mind. To preserve peace, burn memory. And yet here he stood, clutching proof that not everything had burned. Rome was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that belonged more to tombs than cities. Beneath the slow echo of their steps, the 4 moved like shades, Lucius, Servius, Titia, and the boy Plautus, each carrying silence heavier than any shield. They passed the palaces that once gleamed with senatorial pride, the temples now draped in ivy and rumor, until the round silhouette of the Temple of Vesta rose before them like a memory. The marble columns caught the moonlight in silver glints, and the cold air smelled faintly of ashes, as if the sacred fire had only just died. Plautus moved first, guiding them along the outer ring. Here, he whispered, pointing at a narrow niche behind a flaking fresco of the goddess. This is where they hid it. Behind the painted stone, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, was a bronze slot. Servius pulled the bronze tablet from inside his robe and inserted it. With a heavy, ancient click, the wall shifted inward, revealing a passage descending into the earth. No one spoke as they stepped into the darkness. The stairs spiraled downward, every step a soft drumbeat of age. The walls bore faint scratches, words, names, invocations, left by those long gone. "These are the marks of the Vestals," Titia murmured, tracing her fingers along the grooves. "They weren't allowed to write. But this is how they remembered." The final chamber was circular, mirroring the temple above. In the center stood a stone pedestal carved with a shallow depression, clearly meant to hold something, perhaps a tome or a sacred relic. But whatever had once rested there was gone. Lucius approached the far wall. A large sheet of parchment was pinned there, yellowed with time, curled at the edges. It was covered in text, some Latin, some Greek, but it wasn't the words that caught his attention, it was the margins. Dozens of symbols had been inked in the empty spaces, triangles, circles, directional arrows, intersecting paths, room names, secret symbols. And at the very edge, one phrase had been circled not once, but 3 times. Domus Voces. The House of Voice. Titia leaned over his shoulder. "It's real," she said, breathless. "I thought it was just a story. They say it was where forbidden speeches were hidden," Servius added. "Rewritten. Preserved but never spoken." Lucius ran a hand through his hair. "If the speeches were stored here, why move them? Why hide them again?" Servius pointed to a small line of script beneath the title, barely visible. "Vox non cadet cum corpore. Quaerite non verba," said Custodum. "The voice does not die with the body. Seek not the words, but the keeper." Lucius read it aloud. "The keeper," he echoed. "Then someone still remembers." Plautus stirred. "What if they're still guarding it?" Before anyone could answer, a faint scuff echoed from deeper in the tunnel. They froze. "Someone's here," Plautus whispered, backing into Titia's side. Servius turned, already pulling a knife from beneath his cloak. He moved through the corridor with practiced caution, the others close behind. Around a bend they saw her. A woman, tall, cloaked in dark wool, a blindfold wrapped around her eyes. She stood at the far end of the corridor, utterly still, as though she had been waiting a very long time. "Who are you?" Servius asked. Her voice was soft, cracked like ancient parchment. "I am she who listens." The silence that followed her words was deeper than before. It settled like dust, old and sacred. "I am the last of the Vestals," she said. "When the fire died, the voice remained. Not in scrolls, not in stones, but in memory. We were taught to listen, and to carry what should not be written." Titia stepped forward. "Do you know of Cicero's final speech?" The woman nodded. "What was spoken does not matter. What was meant still echoes." "There's a place," Lucius said. "Domus Voces." A smile, faint as breath, curved the woman's lips. "It exists. Beneath where no senators dare tread. A vault not of papyrus, but of remembrance. The truth is not locked behind words, young one. It speaks, when listened to." They stood, motionless. The weight of Rome's memory pressed in from all sides. As they turned to go, the woman called to Lucius. "Wait." He turned. She extended a hand empty, but pointed. "You seek your father's truth. But the voice that guided him still lives. In me." Lucius's heart stuttered. "You knew him?" "I knew his silence," she said. "He did not die. He chose to disappear. To protect what the Empire could not bury." And then she stepped back into the shadows. The morning mist settled low over the Roman Forum, clinging to broken columns like memories that refused to vanish. The great stones, once trodden by senators, generals, and traitors, now echoed only with silence, dense, heavy, and aware. It wasn't just fog. It felt like the breath of time itself, lingering to witness something long overdue. Lucius led the group, the fragmentary map from the Temple of Vesta clenched in his hand, now damp with sweat. Every step forward echoed too loud. Behind him walked Servius, stern and steady, then Titia, whose eyes had grown sharper in recent days, and Plot, small but alert, his fingers twitching as if still tracing invisible letters in the air. The map showed a place that didn't exist. At least, not officially. But every word left in margins carried weight now. And they all followed the lines scrawled next to a phrase etched in Lucius's mind like a whisper in stone. Seek not words, seek the keeper. They came to a pair of fractured columns lost beneath ivy. Between them lay a flat stone, discolored by rain and soot. There was no inscription on top. But near the edge, etched clumsily and deeply as if carved in haste, one word had survived. Voces. This is it, Titia whispered, her breath visible in the chilled air. The stone marks the threshold. Servius stepped forward, withdrew his dagger, and slid the blade into the gap between the stones. It caught. With a strained push, the slab shifted, revealing a stairway descending into blackness. They lit torches and went down. The air thickened with every step. The chamber they entered was not a storage vault, it was a sanctuary. 12 stone arches formed a perfect circle around a central pedestal. Each arch was empty, but above them, ancient Latin words remained. Veritas non clamet. Memoria sine voci. Dicta quae non dicta sunt. Lucius moved slowly, his eyes sweeping across the sacred emptiness. Here, truth hadn't been erased. It had been kept, hidden not to silence it, but to protect it. Plot pressed his ear to one of the arches. I hear something, he said. Not voices, echoes. Like someone speaking, long ago, but still here. Lucius touched the stone. A vibration passed through his fingers. A heartbeat, or something older. Then footsteps. Servius raised a hand. All fell silent. The trapdoor above opened with a sharp creak. 3 figures descended. At the center, Gaius Liberius. He wore a deep blue toga trimmed in gold, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 2 guards. Unlike the others, they carried no weapons. Well, Liberius said, you've made it. The Domus Vocis. The last threshold. I admit, I thought you'd die with the archives. You burned them, Servius said, voice low with fury. I cleansed them, Liberius replied. Rome does not need the weight of broken voices. We build forward. You're afraid of what remains, Lucius said, stepping forward. Liberius tilted his head. I fear ghosts that still speak. Voices are dangerous when no longer bound by bodies. Behind him, one of the guards hesitated. Plot had wandered behind the pedestal, fingers brushing something hidden beneath. A small lever. He pulled it. The arches groaned. Then sound. Not loud. Not clear. But real. A voice, female, calm and unshaken, spoke from the walls themselves. This house is not for conquest. It is for memory. Let no man raise sword here, lest he lose not just his hand, but his name. The guards froze. Liberius flinched, his hand twitching toward his ring. But the moment broke. He turned and hissed. None of you will leave this place. He motioned. But the guards didn't move. Titia stepped closer to Lucius. They heard it, she whispered. And they remember. One of the arches shifted. Behind it, a tunnel. Narrow, dark, and not empty. There, burning on the wall, a torch still flickered. Lucius moved forward. On the edge of the stone beside the arch was a sigil. T. Terentius. He staggered. Servius stepped beside him. That's your family's seal. Lucius didn't speak. His heart had already answered. His father hadn't vanished. He had walked into silence, and left a flame still burning. The passage behind the stone arch narrowed into a long, curving corridor. The torchlight flickered along its rough-hewn walls, casting uneven shadows that danced like memories trying to take shape. The air smelled of stone, old wax, and time left undisturbed for too long. Someone had been here only moments before. The flame had not dimmed. The air was not still. Servius walked at the front, his stride cautious but purposeful. Titia followed, alert, her fingers resting lightly on the hilt of the small blade she now carried. Plot, though wide-eyed, showed no fear, only a kind of reverent curiosity. Lucius came last, his steps slower, his thoughts louder than ever. It felt as if the walls recognized him. As if the tunnel was narrowing not to block them, but to draw him in. The corridor ended in a circular stone chamber, domed and silent, unlike anything they had seen before. No scrolls. No shelves. Just stone. Just names. Hundreds of them, etched into the walls and even, unadorned lines. The chiseling was rough in places, graceful in others, but all unmistakably done by hand. No artist had carved these. These were inscriptions by the very people whose names were remembered here. Archivists. Scribes. Speakers. Guardians of memory. This, Servius's voice caught. This is not an archive. It's a sanctuary. He stepped forward, touching one of the names as though greeting an old friend. Not those who ruled Rome, he said, but those who remembered her truths. Lucius scanned the wall. His heartbeat was in his throat. His gaze moved line by line, until he saw it. Terentius M. 17 Mart. My father! The words left his lips before he even knew he was speaking. He reached out and touched the letters. They were shallow but sure. The marks of someone who had cut truth into silence. He dropped to one knee, not from grief, but from understanding. His father had not fled. His father had remained. Chosen to remain. I thought he left me, Lucius whispered. But maybe he didn't. Maybe this was his way of staying. Beside the name were several others, linked by subject, perhaps, or by fate. All tied to forbidden orations, hidden texts, suppressed speeches. And beneath them, the familiar symbol, 3 vertical lines. Below the symbol, 1 line of text, trembling and uneven. They didn't let me speak, so I wrote silence. Plot, who had been inspecting the base of the room, gave a small cry. There's something here! He pulled free a small wooden box, its edges scorched but intact. Inside, a leather-bound volume, frayed at the edges, but untouched by mold or dust. Lucius opened it carefully. Inside, no written speech. No politics. No proclamations. Only diagrams. Patterns of thought. Swirls of memory. Lines that looped like a voice chasing itself into clarity. And in the center, Residential Publica in Voce Latet. The Republic hides in the voice. And beneath, in Monte Silentii, on the Hill of Silence. Monte Silenti, Titia murmured. That's not a temple. It's a place. Outside the city. They say the old philosophers met there when the Curia was closed to them. No records were ever kept of their gatherings, Servius added. Only whispers. Lucius closed the book with trembling fingers. He's there, he said. Waiting. Not for an audience. Not for redemption. But to be heard. Finally. Then came the sound, soft but clear. Footsteps above. Deliberate. Measured. Not laborious. Someone lighter. Someone alone. They all froze. Titia moved toward the wall, tilting her head. A woman, she said. She's not lost. She's following us. A small crack in the ceiling let in a sliver of morning light, and the scent of something strangely familiar. Lavender. Not forum lavender. Wild. Hill lavender. Lucius turned slowly. The echo of the name on the wall still rang in his chest. He looked back at the final page of the leather book, where a more recent hand had written. I remain in silence. If someone comes, tell him, his voice has not yet been spoken. But it already exists. Signed M. Terentius. Lucius tucked the book under his arm. I'm not going there to bring him back, he said. I'm going to listen. Rome lay behind them now, far beyond the veil of hills and fading echoes. What had once been walls of knowledge, whispers of rebellion, and the breath of stone and ink had given way to olive trees and the open silence of the countryside. The air was cleaner here, almost sweet with memory. But silence pressed harder, more personal. The hill known on forgotten maps as Mons Silenti, the hill of silence, stood before them not with majesty, but with stillness. No monuments rose from its slopes. No voices called from its summit. It was not a place one discovered. It was a place that allowed itself to be found. Lucius led the way, his father's worn leather journal wrapped in linen beneath his cloak. Servius followed, the quiet blade at his hip long untouched, but ever present. Titia walked close behind, her gaze as sharp as the crest she once decoded in the margins of imperial decrees. Plot, the youngest among them, no longer looked down at the ground. His eyes scanned the sky, the wind, as if listening for ghosts. "There's someone there," Plot murmured suddenly. "I can't see them. But they're not walking away. They're waiting." The others exchanged no words. The wind, too, had stilled. At the summit, moss and stone shaped a wide platform, the color of ash. In the center, resting on an unadorned slab, lay a scroll, bound in black thread. No guards. No symbols. Just the scroll, and the silence around it. Lucius approached. His hands didn't tremble, though something inside him did. He broke the thread. Unrolled the parchment. "If you are reading this, then I did not disappear. I chose silence, because the world had lost the patience to hear. But if you have come, it means someone has begun to listen again. Do not search for me in shadows. I am not lost. I am here. M. Terentius." Lucius sank to his knees, not in grief, but in stillness. The silence no longer weighed on him. It moved with him. It welcomed him. It spoke without sound. "My father didn't vanish," he whispered. "He became part of something he couldn't carry alone." A figure stepped out from the line of olive trees at the edge of the clearing. A woman, wrapped in a cloak the color of dusk. Her eyes were steady, her face marked by time, not sorrow. "You are Lucius Terentius," she said. I am Cassia. I was his voice, when he no longer wished to use his own." Lucius stood. "You knew him?" "We spoke often. Not in words, but in knowing. You came to find your father. But what you've found is his choice." She unwrapped a satchel and revealed 2 scrolls. One was brittle, ancient. The other, newer, smoother parchment. "This," she said, holding up the older one, "is the lost speech of Cicero. The words that would have shaken Augustus to his knees. A weapon made of syntax. And this?" Lucius asked, pointing to the second. "This was written by your father years later. It is not a sword. It is a seed. It does not fight. It offers another way." Titia stepped forward. "And you want him to choose?" Cassia nodded. "The Empire is listening again. Even if it doesn't know it." Lucius looked down at both scrolls. Then at the sky. "I don't believe in swords made of words anymore," he said softly. "But I believe in memory." He placed both scrolls back in the satchel, walked to the stone altar, and set them down together. Then he withdrew a single, blank page. He dipped his pen in ink and began to write. "My name is Lucius Terentius. I have been given 2 voices, one to remember, one to prevent repetition. I write not for the crowd, but for the one who will someday stand where I do now." He sealed the paper with wax, pressed his father's old insignia into it. They began to descend the hill as night approached. But at the edge of the path, Lucius turned. A shape stood atop the hill, silhouetted by moonlight. Cloaked. Still. Holding something metal. His old canteen. And then, without sound, it was gone. They returned to Rome at first light. The city still wore its shadows, rooftops soaked in quiet, alleyways heavy with forgotten dreams. The Curia stood like a titan fallen asleep, unmoved by what stirred in its streets. But the Domus Livia, that building knew. The doors, once sealed with discipline, now hung open. The scent met them before the silence did, not dust, not parchment, smoke. They stepped inside, and the ache of loss was immediate. Shelves were broken. Scrolls gone. What remained was blackened, burned, or buried in ash. The very air seemed to carry mourning, like a chorus of ghosts exhaling in unison. Yet in the middle of the scorched marble floor, one parchment had been left behind, untouched by flame, untouched by fear. Lucius picked it up. A single sentence. A voice that does not speak still exists. No one said a word. They walked further in, to the room where they'd first seen Gaius Liberius, and he was there once again. Not hiding. Not armed. Standing, alone, in the same blue toga, hands clasped in front of him as though waiting for an answer. "I knew you would return," he said, not coldly, not warmly. "I hoped you wouldn't. But I knew." Lucius didn't flinch. "I thought you would bring the speech." Liberius continued. "Read it. Stir something. Strike at the Empire." "I didn't," Lucius said. "I can see that." A pause. "And why not?" Lucius stepped forward and unfastened the satchel on his side. From it he took the small flask, the one that had reappeared at the summit of the Hill of Silence. Inside was the spiral wound scroll, the last memory of a man who had chosen quiet over fire. "This contains my father's voice," Lucius said. "But it also holds the voices of others. Those who refused to shout. Those who whispered. Those who were silenced not by force, but by history." Liberius watched him, eyes narrow but unblinking. "Will you speak it now?" he asked. "No," Lucius answered. "Then why come back? To place it where it belongs. Not in the hands of the angry, or the broken, but in the path of the patient. Someone will come. When it's time. You fear what it might do?" Lucius shook his head slowly. "I fear what we've already done with voices like this. Turn them into banners, swords, slogans. I won't let this one bleed." That night, in the furthest wing of the archive, behind a false shelf, where a narrow crevice marked the only remaining truth, Lucius opened the old vault that Servius had once shown him. Inside, he placed the scroll. He added to it the speech of Cicero, the map to the House of Voice, a blank parchment, and his own short letter. It read, "To the one who finds this, listen before you read. Sit with it. Breathe with it. Truth doesn't arrive screaming. It lingers. If it's still here, it's because someone was meant to hear it. Maybe you." Titia chose to stay behind. She reopened the outer cloister of the Temple of Vesta, converting it not into a school of rhetoric, but of stillness. She taught not how to speak, but how to listen. Her first student was Plot, and the boy who once dusted scrolls became a guardian of echoes. Servius disappeared not long after. No one saw him go. But on the inside of the door he left a message etched with the tip of a broken quill. "I kept silence. I carry truth. And I learned that sometimes, to remember, is enough." Lucius left at dawn. He didn't say goodbye. Not because he didn't want to, but because there was no need. Some things remained spoken even when unspoken. He passed the Forum, quieter than he remembered it, and walked beyond the gates of Rome. His bag was light. Inside, a single, fresh parchment. No story yet. No ink. On the road, a traveler approached him, curious but kind. "Where are you going?" he asked. Lucius smiled. "To find someone who will listen." And he kept walking. Into the silence. Into the breath between words. Into the space where voices wait, not to be heard by all, but to be understood by one. Years had passed. Not the kind of years that one counts in winters or emperors, but the quiet kind, the years that settle into your bones without asking. Rome had shifted again, as it always did. New laws. New banners. New names etched in marble beside the forgotten ones. Lucius Terentius no longer walked the Curia. He no longer sat hunched under oil lamps, ink-stained and sleep-starved, surrounded by parchment and whispers. He lived now on a hill beyond the city's last breath, where the walls were whitewashed and the wind spoke softly through fig trees. A small house. One door. No locks. No guards. Some called it exile. He called it clarity. Children came sometimes, with dusty feet and open eyes. Travelers, too, bearing rumors and olives, more eager to listen than to speak. Once, even a former magistrate arrived, wrapped in wool and regrets. But mostly it was silence that kept him company. Not emptiness. Just presence. The kind of silence that grows only where truth has once been spoken. On his desk sat a book with no title. Its cover worn smooth by the years. Its spine cracked but unbroken. Inside were pages, some written with precision, others in hurried scrawl. Some filled only with ink dots, drawings, maps, symbols. One page had nothing at all except a small, deliberate mark. 3 vertical lines. The mark of those who remembered. One spring morning, when the sky was silver with light, Titia returned. She came walking up the hill barefoot, sandals in one hand, the other carrying a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Her hair, once coal dark, now held silver streaks. Her posture remained strong. And her smile, when she saw him, was exactly the same as the day they parted. "You kept the hill," she said. "You kept the fire," Lucius replied. She handed him the bundle. Inside was his old flask. "Plot kept it at the school," she said. "He said it reminded people that words could still matter." "He taught more than I ever could," Lucius said. He knew that listening was the first act of remembering. They shared a simple meal, bread, cheese, wine, and quiet laughter. Titia stayed until sunset, then walked with him to the garden where the olive trees watched without judgment. That evening, under candlelight, Lucius opened a drawer in his desk and took out a scroll, older now, edges worn soft. The ink, however, remained sharp. Titia recognized it. She had seen it years ago. "You never sent it?" "No," he said. "It was never meant to be read. Only to be found." "To whom is it written?" Lucius smiled faintly. "To the one who doesn't look for answers, only questions." He folded it, placed it in his satchel, and said, "It's time." They walked together once more, just as they had, when all this began. Past the last walls of the city, across quiet fields, up the old path no one charted. Back to the hill of silence. The altar stood as they left it. Worn, cracked, but not forgotten. Lucius placed the scroll inside. Alongside it, he added a slip of parchment. On it, in his father's handwriting, "I remained in silence. If someone finds this, tell them their voice has not yet spoken, but already exists." And beneath it, Lucius wrote his own. "I did not record the truth. I let it breathe. If you find this, do not seek me. Seek yourself." As the sun dipped behind the horizon, wind moved through the leaves, not cold, but knowing. Titia placed her hand on his shoulder. "No one will know you were here," she said. "They don't need to," he replied. "This isn't a story for the city. It's a seed." Later, in the final pages of his nameless book, Lucius wrote, "The archive of the heart is not found in buildings, nor guarded by time. It lives wherever someone listens deeply enough." He closed the book, left space on the last page. And in that silence, full, warm, alive, he whispered not an ending, but an invitation.